When an idea gets no response, it often feels weaker. That reaction feels natural. But nothing about the idea itself has changed. Only the silence around it has. In the shorts, one question was left open. Why does silence feel like information? This video continues from there. When an idea is expressed, it enters the environment as a stable object. Its structure is complete. Its logic is intact. At that moment, nothing about the idea is missing. What follows is not a change in content, but a change in context. As seconds pass without a response, the surrounding conditions begin to shift. The idea remains the same, yet the space it occupies feels different. Attention lingers, expectation builds, silence takes shape. This silence is rarely experienced as empty. It is experienced as unresolved. The absence of sound becomes noticeable, precisely because something was expected to occur. A reply, a reaction, a signal that the exchange is moving forward. In environments where communication flows quickly, timing carries meaning. Responses tend to arrive within a familiar rhythm. When that rhythm is interrupted, the interruption itself becomes salient. The pause stands out not because it is long, but because it breaks an unspoken pattern. At first, the pause may feel neutral, a breath, a moment of consideration. But as time extends, the quality of the silence changes. It stops feeling temporary and starts feeling directional. The idea does not weaken, yet it begins to feel less anchored. This shift is not driven by analysis. No one has evaluated the idea and found it lacking. Instead, the environment has stopped providing reference points. Without feedback, the idea floats. Time plays a critical role here. Silence does not accumulate evenly. Early seconds pass unnoticed. Later seconds feel heavy. The longer the gap persists, the more attention is drawn to the absence itself. During this period, interpretation begins to fill the space, not through deliberate reasoning, but through automatic inference. The mind attempts to make sense of what is happening. Why is no one responding? Is reflection taking place? Or is something wrong? These questions are rarely formed consciously. They emerge as subtle impressions, a slight discomfort, a sense that the moment is slipping out of alignment. Importantly, nothing new has been learned about the idea. No additional information has been introduced, yet perception continues to shift. The silence becomes a condition the idea must exist within, and conditions shape perception. In many social settings, speed is implicitly linked to relevance. Fast responses signal engagement. Delayed responses feel ambiguous. Ambiguity invites interpretation. As the pause continues, the idea begins to feel less central, not because it was displaced, but because attention drifts. The absence of response creates a vacuum, and attention rarely remains fixed on empty space. This is not a judgment. It is a redistribution of focus. The environment moves on, even if the idea has not been resolved. And as focus moves, perceived importance follows. What began as a clear expression now feels suspended, not rejected, not accepted, simply unattended. At this stage, the idea is no longer being assessed on its own terms. It is being experienced through the discomfort of the silence that surrounds it. The longer this condition persists, the more the silence itself becomes the dominant feature of the moment. The idea fades into the background, not because it failed, but because the structure that would normally hold it in place has temporarily dissolved. This state of being unattended is not dramatic. Nothing visibly collapses. No clear rejection occurs. Yet something subtle shifts in how the moment is held. Silence allows the situation to remain unresolved. And unresolved situations tend to invite quiet assumptions. Not firm conclusions, but faint impressions that settle without resistance. The idea becomes associated with waiting. Waiting becomes associated with uncertainty. And uncertainty slowly alters the emotional tone of the space. This does not require conscious agreement from anyone present. It happens through exposure, through repetition, through the simple fact of remaining in a condition where nothing arrives to stabilize meaning. The idea is still there. It has not been disproven. It has not been challenged. It has simply lost the structural support that keeps attention oriented toward it. In this way, silence reshapes perception, not by adding information, but by withholding the signals that normally prevent drift. What feels like a change in value is often a change in conditions. And conditions, once altered, quietly guide attention away without needing permission. As silence persists, attention often turns inward, not by choice, but by default. Without external signals to guide interpretation, the mind begins to supply its own. This process does not feel creative. It feels practical, a way to reduce uncertainty. The speaker may revisit the moment. They may replay the wording, the tone, the timing. They may search for what might have caused the lack of response. This does not begin as self-criticism. It begins as sense-making, an attempt to understand what is happening in the absence of feedback. Yet as the silence continues, interpretation subtly shifts. Possible explanations multiply, and among them, the cautious ones tend to carry more weight. The idea may start to feel less solid, not because its logic has changed, but because confidence relies on context. When context offers no reinforcement, confidence loosens. Listeners experience a similar shift. They may have registered the idea as interesting. They may have felt a moment of agreement. But without hearing that response echoed by others, the impression begins to feel less certain. Silence weakens shared certainty. What felt clear in isolation becomes ambiguous in a group. In social settings, people rarely evaluate ideas alone. They calibrate their reactions through others. A nod, a comment, a question, any signal that confirms alignment. When those signals are missing, alignment becomes difficult to maintain. Individuals begin to rely more heavily on what they observe rather than what they think. This is where the structure of the group becomes relevant. In shared spaces, attention is distributed. People look outward for cues that indicate how to respond. When no one moves, the stillness itself becomes informative. Each person waits, and in waiting, each person assumes someone else has a reason to wait. This creates a loop of mutual observation. No one rejects the idea. No one endorses it. Yet the absence of action begins to feel collective. Silence starts to resemble agreement, not because consensus exists, but because no alternative has been expressed. This is not coordination. It is hesitation mirrored across individuals. Over time, hesitation acquires the appearance of judgment. The longer the silence lasts, the more it feels intentional. And the more intentional it feels, the more difficult it becomes to interrupt. Breaking silence carries risk. Speaking first draws attention. It exposes uncertainty. so people continue to wait. The idea remains present, but socially suspended. It belongs to no one. It is not defended, questioned, or expanded. In this state, the group's structure subtly shifts. Responsibility diffuses. Engagement becomes optional. And without engagement, the idea loses momentum. Momentum in social systems is rarely about quality alone. It is about visibility, about movement, about signals that something is happening. Silence provides none of these. As a result, the idea begins to feel less relevant, not because it has been evaluated and found lacking, but because it no longer occupies a central position in the group's shared attention. What is observed most clearly is not the idea itself, but the fact that nothing is being done with it. That observation becomes difficult to ignore. Even after movement resumes, the earlier silence does not disappear completely. It often lingers as a faint reference in memory. The idea may now be discussed, adjusted, or set aside. But the period where nothing happened remains quietly attached to it, not as evidence, but as atmosphere. This lingering effect is rarely examined. It is simply absorbed into the overall impression of the exchange. The idea feels familiar again, yet subtly altered by the path it traveled. What remains notable is how little effort was involved. No argument was required. No evaluation was completed. A temporary absence of structure was enough to shift perception. This suggests that judgment is not only shaped by what is said, but by the conditions under which nothing is said. Silence does not need to speak loudly. It only needs time. And once time passes without orientation, perception adjusts on its own, quietly, without asking whether the adjustment was warranted. Thanks for staying with us until the end. If this perspective helped, a like, comment, or share supports this work. And if you want more reflections like this, consider subscribing.